Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Lowan, and I've been the leader of the BC Greens for approximately 22 hours. There are so many incredible local leaders here today, and for those of you who I've not yet met, I'm really looking forward to getting to know you in this new role. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded territory of the Lekwungen peoples, also known as the Songhees and the Kosamson nations, as well as the Wasanich and the Sakum First Nations, the Sayout, the Sarlip, and the Pocatchin, who've stewarded these lands and waters since time immemorial. In addition, I want to offer the same gratitude to the over 200 nations across this province that have protected and defended the lands and waters within the borders of what we know colonially as British Columbia. As local leaders, many of you have been at the forefront of reconciliation efforts across the province. I especially want to recognize the representatives of the Tla'amin Nation who brought forward the Special Resolution Number 4 to continue the work of implementing Indigenous rights at all levels of government. You have my support at the provincial level. It is a privilege to be standing before you today, delivering this speech at UBCM in my first official act as leader. There's some familiar faces here who I've had the pleasure of working with already. I want to give a special thanks to Councillor Pete Fry, who's been holding it down in Vancouver and defending the city's work on indoor air quality, despite the ferocious lobbying by Fortis and the fracking industry. Pete, let's work on getting you a bigger caucus next year, perhaps in a mayoral capacity. Woo! We're behind you. We have your back. Is Comox City Council here this morning? Any reps from Comox? I know Jonathan Kerr, of course, Mayor Minions, Councillor Mayer. I just want to lift up these incredibly hardworking representatives who put green values front and center in local decision-making. Whether or not you have political parties or green slates in your municipality or regional district, the fact is that local governments have been doing the heavy lifting when it comes to climate action in this province. And too often, it's the provincial government blocking or rolling back these policies. I'm here to change that. I'm building a coalition to build real grassroots power into our negotiations with the BC NDP. Indigenous communities and local governments are a key part of that. And so let's find the issues that we can work on together to deliver concrete wins for your communities. My colleague, MLA Jeremy Valeriot's riding covers Pemberton, Whistler, and Squamish. Residents there are trying to save money on gas and cut down congestion on the Sea to Sky. The obvious solution is a bus, and yet the province still hasn't come forward with the funding. And on the Gulf Islands, in my colleague MLA Rob Botterill's riding, residents are leading the country in EV adoption, and yet they're being punished as rebates are cut back. Whether it's funding for libraries or shelters of our most vulnerable residents, the response from senior levels of government is the same. The cupboard is bare. Yet, when foreign state-owned companies or American oligarchs want more subsidies for oil and gas projects, somehow there's always a couple extra $1 billion between the couch cushions. The logic our government uses is that more raw resource exports will create more jobs and revenue for the things that our communities need. When commodity prices are up, that's sometimes true. But when the roller coaster comes down, the local impacts are brutal. We need to move past this boom and bust cycle and the constant feeling of begging the government for our own money. The good news is that the people of BC are ready for change. They're ready for something new. I come to this work with a decade of experience as a coalition builder and a policy researcher. I've published critical research exposing how fossil fuel interests are embedded in our institutions. And I've built coalitions representing over 1.5 million Canadians. And most importantly, I've worked alongside First Nations to resist harmful projects and find solutions that are rooted in justice. Over the last 3 months, I ran a campaign to see if we could chart a new course in BC politics. At the beginning of July, I launched my campaign for the BC Green Party leadership called Fight the Oligarchs, Fund Our Future. My campaign's core message was simple. We'll never be able to fix what's broken so long as a small handful of billionaires and corporate monopolies take more and more of the pie each year. There is no trickle down, only a sucking sound as our wealth flies off to tax havens and billionaire apocalypse compounds around the world. When these foreign oligarchs do invest in BC, it's not out of a sense of charity, it's to facilitate more wealth removal. I've always seen the compounded crises of our time, the climate crisis, the affordability crisis, the housing crisis, the toxic drugs crisis, for what they are. A rigged, ruthless battle between billionaires, their vested political interests, and the rest of us just trying to get by. As local leaders, you're left to deal with the side effects, the human toil of this battle. And it's putting a serious strain on our institutions, our first responders, our infrastructure, and social fabric across BC. I understand why people are frustrated with chaos and disorder at the ground level, and I know that a lot of that stress and frustration gets taken out on you. 8 years of the same government and all our major issues have gotten worse. Life expectancy in BC is declining. People are 1 or 2 paychecks away from insolvency or eviction. And the gap between the typical BC household and the ultra-wealthy continues to grow. It's not a coincidence that Facebook ads and AstroTurf campaigns scapegoating vulnerable people are funded by some of those same billionaires. They need to distract us from the real injustice and keep us fighting amongst ourselves. But it's a trap. And people are starting to figure it out. My campaign dug into the roots of many of these overlapping crises we face: affordability, climate, housing, healthcare, toxic drugs, and the trampling of Indigenous rights, to shine a bright light on who is to blame for getting us into this position: mega corporations, billionaires, and our governments who enable them. What followed was a surge of support, a wave of thousands of new members joining the BC Greens, buoyed by endorsers like Dr. David Suzuki, Dr. Gabor Mate, Zipporah Berman, and Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. People are showing that they're hungry for truth-telling, and they want to understand that the way they are struggling to make ends meet each day is not their fault. Throughout my campaign, I proposed a bold vision of wealth redistribution through measures like a wealth tax and a windfall profits tax to ensure that the richest corporations and the 1% in BC are paying their fair share. With the province facing a record deficit, we need new sources of revenue to fund services that people in BC deserve. This vision resonated with individuals across the political spectrum and pulled in many people who had completely given up on politics. This surge of support illustrated that people in BC are ready to chart a new course, a course where climate action and affordability go hand in hand, where workers, families, and young people can plan a future that isn't suffocated with wildfire smoke and skyrocketing housing costs. Instead of a government chasing short-term profits and giveaways to corporations, the Greens are focused on a well-being framework, one that measures success by the health of our communities, our environment, and our people, not how much wealth billionaires can hoard. I know that each of you sees every day the struggles your neighbors and families are facing. You see firsthand the consequences of provincial and federal decisions that don't always provide the support you need to meet the growing and complex challenges. And I know the toll that this takes, especially when much of this work is done with such limited resources. each year, more of our neighbors fall victim to homelessness, addiction, and the toxic drugs crisis without adequate wraparound, frontline, and preventative supports. Too often, those in need are blamed for their struggles, rather than looking at the lack of systems that should have supported them in the first place. Even routine needs, upgrades to sewage, water, electricity, and roads are becoming harder to keep up with as growth puts more pressure on aging infrastructure. Meanwhile, rent and mortgage costs continue to climb at unsustainable levels. 1 in 6 renters in BC spends more than half of their income on housing, on monthly rent, and that is the worst deal in the country. Municipalities are also struggling to attract and retain skilled workers, leaving critical services under strain. In rural areas especially, many people, as you know, don't have access to a primary healthcare provider. And across the province, communities are squeezed to make ends meet while facing higher than average tax lifts, costs that should not fall on those already struggling. And frankly, in the face of this strain, polarization is growing. Too often, we're pitted against one another rather than addressing the systems that created these challenges. And at its core, the province has been downloading the cost of systemic social issues onto municipalities. Local governments are left with more responsibility than ever, without the scale of resources to meet the moment. We need evidence-based preventative care, wraparound supports, and sustainable provincial funding. Instead, we've seen creeping privatization of healthcare, billions in fossil fuel subsidies, and decisions that too often take power away from communities rather than supporting them. And we're seeing the consequences of this approach right now with the BCGU strikes. Workers are fighting for fair wages and safe conditions while the government drags its feet into the 4th week of these strikes. The Greens are committed to building real relationships with unions because strong public services depend on a workforce that is respected, supported, and fairly compensated. Whether it's housing, healthcare, or climate resilience, municipalities need support. The province has an obligation to provide stable, sustainable funding so that local governments can get ahead and not just scramble to respond. I believe that the same ideas can drive democratic engagement and help us defend our institutions at the municipal level. If you're running for re-election next year and you want to build organized people power, let's talk. And if you have served your term and want to consider a jump to the provincial level, let's also talk. Building houses, expanding transit, increasing community health centers, investing in renewable energy all over the province, these are all things that will create good, lasting jobs and build up our local economies. Social connection, modern infrastructure, and better access to essential services, these are the things that will enable our communities to weather the storms, regardless whether they're coming from south of the border or our destabilized climate. This better, brighter future starts at the local level and absolutely depends on investing and empowering our municipalities through stable and reliable funding. The province needs to step up with the funding and step back when it comes to encroaching on local jurisdiction. I've never loved the phrase creatures of the province, so I will speak out when I see local elected officials sidelined or overridden. My job now is to be an opposition leader. I'm happy to be a thorn in the side of the government when that is useful, but I'm also a facilitator, an organizer, and a movement builder. I know when to step behind the scenes. It's the results that matter to me, not the soapbox. Together, I know we can be stronger to mount a formidable challenge to the billionaires and big corporations driving the crises of our time, to take care of the people enduring its effects. I dream of a future and a present BC where everyone can thrive, where small businesses are supported, not squeezed out by monopolies, where we build resilience against wildfires and floods instead of reacting after the fact, where investments in housing, healthcare, and renewable energy create good local jobs while lowering costs for families, where Indigenous nations have the resources and respect to fully exercise their sovereignty. This future is possible, and it requires rethinking how we invest, moving away from handouts to corporations and towards empowering our communities. And that's what a well-being framework is all about, shifting our priorities so that every decision the government makes is measured against whether it improves people's lives, strengthens communities, and protects our shared future. That means funding a massive increase in non-market social housing, expanding public transit and community healthcare centers, investing in renewable energy and resilient infrastructure, ensuring that nutritious local food is affordable for every household, creating tens of thousands of good green jobs across the province. All of this depends on stable and reliable funding for municipalities so you can deliver the services that people depend on. And the reality is we're all being squeezed. But we have to have the creativity, the grit, the innovation to build something better. Our communities have the solutions. With the right tools and support, we can chart a course to a stronger, more resilient, and a more hopeful BC. That is the vision I bring forward, one that is rooted in justice, sustainability, and partnership with municipalities and nations across this province. I have a lot to learn from the people in this room, and I appreciate the chance to address the plenary. I so look forward to working with you to build the communities we need and we deserve. Thank you.